A ceasefire in the Middle East is starting to look increasingly uncertain, and markets are reacting accordingly. Good morning. This is the BizNews Daybreak. I'm Asimenite. Coming up, the latest from global markets, rising tensions around the Strait of Hormuz and what that means for oil, a sharp take on growing pressure against the BE policy, a look at how prediction markets are turning the world into a kind of tradable event, and a grounded conversation about South Africa's housing backlog and why the problem may not be policy, but execution. But first, here are the news updates from our partners at Bloomberg.
The U.S. Navy has stopped and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said the Iranian crew refused to listen, so the U.S. Navy stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engine room. Trump also said the ship has been under U.S. Treasury Department sanctions, and right now U.S. Marines have custody of the vessel. Bloomberg's Stephen Stepchinsky spoke about the response on the part of Iran and how it can shape energy markets in the coming weeks.
But it doesn't seem like we've gotten to a position where there's an escalation of attacks between both sides. Now, that really depends on how Iran responds to this ship being taken. If they have a measured response, then perhaps we could see oil actually fall some more as there's an expectation there could be talks later this week. Of course, will they or won't they on Tuesday is a big question in terms of discussions. But if this does spiral into a situation where perhaps Iran takes a step back and says, okay, we're going to start attacking infrastructure across the Middle East, which they had done weeks before the ceasefire, then we could potentially be in a situation where oil does go above 100 and does start to rise.
That is Bloomberg's Stephen Stepchinsky. Now, the shaky ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is set to expire on Tuesday. Earlier today, in a post on Truth Social, President Trump threatened continued strikes on Iran if a deal is not reached. Here is U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz.
All options are on the table. The president's prepared to escalate, to de-escalate. He means it when he said nothing that benefits Iran is coming out of the strait.
That is U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, speaking on CBS Face the Nation. At the same time today, the president promised a quick second round of U.S.-Iran talks in Pakistan. Vice President J.D. Vance, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are all heading to Islamabad on Monday evening. We heard from John Feiner, former Principal Deputy National Security Advisor under President Biden, and he focused on some of the unresolved points.
One is that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and there's no indication that unless the United States puts something serious on the table to compensate Iran in some way, sanctions relief or something else, that the Iranians are inclined to open it. And second, this nuclear material, which we've talked about for weeks now, highly enriched uranium that Iran retains, despite the United States having bombed it many times and told Iran they have to give this up in order for the war to end. Those are the two big issues in the talks, and we don't seem any closer to resolving them.
That was John Feiner, former Principal Deputy National Security Advisor under President Biden, speaking on Bloomberg's This Weekend. Meantime, the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, Kajsa Ollongren, says the European Union is focused on de-escalating tensions in the Middle East.
The ceasefires in the Middle East are fragile, and also the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, now it's open, now it's closed. We don't know. So that is, I think, what people are discussing here as well, how to deal with this instability in the world. And from the European Union's point of view, I'm very much stressing the importance of cooperation and coordination and returning to the rules-based order where freedom of navigation is normal.
That was Kajsa Ollongren on Bloomberg's This Weekend. The United Arab Emirates has reportedly begun talks with the U.S. about a financial backstop in case the war in Iran plunges the country further into crisis. The Wall Street Journal reports the governor of the UAE's central bank raised the idea of a currency swap line with officials from the Fed and the U.S. Treasury last week during meetings in Washington. Now, there is growing anxiety within the UAE that the war could harm its economy and its position as an international financial center, and that could lead to a draining of foreign currency reserves and trigger capital flight.
Staying with that story, the situation in the Gulf is becoming more uncertain. Following the seizure of an Iranian vessel and continued military activity, the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively contested, with both sides asserting control and oil flows still disrupted. There had been expectations that the route would reopen, but that hasn't materialized.
Laura, how did things unravel in such a manner, and are we back to square one?
It really does feel like Groundhog Day, and that we are in a situation we have found ourselves many times where we're up against a deadline. This time, the ceasefire set to expire on Wednesday morning in Asia, and tensions are really at almost an all-time high here in this war. You had Trump come out on Friday and say that a deal had been struck and that the Strait of Hormuz would open. Over the course of the weekend, it became clear that none of that actually came to materialize. And in fact, these peace talks that Trump is talking about taking place in Islamabad, Iran is not even sure that they're going to send a delegation to them. So, lots of different pieces here of the Strait of Hormuz. We have a situation where you essentially have both Iran and the U.S. sort of wrestling control, saying, no, I'm blocking it. No, I'm blocking the strait. So this continues to remain closed after a brief moment of optimism that it would be open. We saw Iran fire on a UK-linked ship, as well as the U.S. seizing an Iranian cargo ship that was transiting through the strait, blowing out their engine room and boarding that ship as well. So we have a lot of confusion, a lot of sort of escalation, and potentially a breakage of the ceasefire, depending how both sides see it.
Laura, you just read my mind calling this Groundhog Day. That's exactly what I told my producers earlier today, because it seems we're just talking about the same points in the last 7 weeks of the war. Mixed messaging. We don't necessarily know how the negotiations are proceeding. One thing that caught my eye, though, reports from the Wall Street Journal that the UAE might be asking for a currency swap line. How significant is this, given that it seems at least Gulf states are expecting perhaps more deterioration instead of President Trump's optimism that the war will be over soon?
Yeah, this is a real reality check coming from Gulf allies saying, hey, we are not sure that we can hold on much longer. And they're turning to the U.S., who they see as sort of responsible and the instigator of this war, to say, hey, we're going to need help if we find ourselves in a liquidity crunch. The UAE has, said that they've been able to sort of weather the storm so far so well, though, among one of the economies most affected, they've not been able to sell oil to the broader world passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And we could see this start to spiral and escalate if other countries also start making similar asks. Really an indication that they don't see this war ending anytime soon.
Despite Middle East tensions, global markets are showing strong momentum as we head into a heavy week of earnings and economic data. Wall Street closed the week on a high note, with the S&P 500 hitting fresh all-time highs on Friday, up 4.5% for the week. On the currency front, the rand is showing some resilience this morning, currently trading at 16 Rand 37 to the US dollar. Looking at US stocks, Nvidia was up 1.7% to close at $201, while Netflix took a sharp 9.7% hit, closing under $100. Back home, it was a golden day for miners. Implats surged 9.25%, followed closely by Northern Platinum, up 8.7%. Sasol felt the heat, dropping nearly 10% to 193 Rand. Keep an eye on the clock today. All eyes are on the upcoming US retail sales data and the start of a massive week for tech earnings, including Tesla tomorrow. I'm Rowan Erasmus, and you're listening to the BizNews Daybreak.
Back home, the debate around economic policy is becoming more direct. In a conversation with Dr. Dirk Hermann, CEO of Solidarity, the argument is that pressure on black economic empowerment is no longer just political, but structural. From public sentiment to market behavior and international pressure, he describes what he calls a perfect storm building around the policy. Here's that discussion.
What Elon did was to bring something that's under the surface to the front. And suddenly there's a big debate. It's, of course, not only Elon. There's actually a couple of things that happened in the past, let's say 2 or 3 years, that actually leads to a perfect storm around black economic empowerment. The first one is the real effect of black economic empowerment is experienced by ordinary South Africans. And that is why we can see that more and more South Africans across the spectrum rejects the notion of a race classification as a basis for policy making. We've seen that also in the recent research of the Institute of Race Relations. So that is in the first page. I think people reject at this stage the policy because they feel the pain, and we can also talk about the cost of black economic empowerment. In the second place, what we see is the market reject the Black economic empowerment policy more and more. The fact of the matter is that the free market on the long run rejects government interference. And we see this now with Black economic empowerment as well. We see how companies are less willing to implement Black economic empowerment policies. Only 40% of companies in South Africa at this stage comply with Black economic empowerment policies. Less than 50% of South African workers are covered by employment equity plans. So that's the second one. We see that the market rejects at this stage Black economic empowerment. And then there's a third element. And the third element actually brought this whole thing together now, and that is that the international world reject trade barriers. And we see that especially with the United States. Elon Musk articulate that. So it's actually not only Elon Musk, it's three big things: people in South Africa, the market, and the international world. And that lead to tremendous pressure on the current Black economic empowerment program to such a extent that I think it's going to lead way.
And from policy is something a bit different, but just as telling about where the world is heading. Prediction markets are growing rapidly, allowing people to bet on everything from elections to economic outcomes, and increasingly even geopolitical events. It raises a broader question. When everything becomes tradable, what does that do to how we think about risk, or even reality? Take a listen.
Platforms online where you can bet on future events. The best known platforms are Kalshi, Polymarket, but there are a bunch of others.
And over the past year, they've exploded in popularity.
Kalshi partnered with CNN, CNBC.
Google announcing it will integrate Kalshi's data.
MLB naming Polymarket its official prediction market partner.
We have New York Stock Exchange owner taking a stake into Polymarket.
You're starting to see Polymarket and Kalshi really get into the mainstream vernacular.
If you had me saying potato on Polymarket, you just made a ton of money.
Prediction market app, dude. You know, online peer-to-peer betting.
The amount of money involved has skyrocketed.
Kalshi currently handles 3 billion of notional trading a week. Just at the beginning of 2025, they were handling 30 million. So 100 times more. We're seeing pretty similar numbers for Polymarket.
The boom is creating a new class of market watchers.
You're just placing trades based on the news and the information that you have.
Information is power.
I was able to pay off my student loans with the money I got from Kalshi. I'm putting myself through grad school. I was able to pay off my car.
But most people aren't paying off their bills. They're losing money.
I feel so bad for 18 to 35-year-old males losing so much money.
People are gambling on war.
As the U.S. and Israel prepared to strike Iran, platforms like Polymarket saw a surge in activity.
One of the criticisms of prediction markets is that they've created the financialization of everything. Should you be even allowed to bet on military endeavors, or should that be something that is off limits?
As these markets get more esoteric and specific, they become more easily gameable, more difficult to monitor insider trading and market manipulation.
So what happens when you can bet on almost anything?
And finally, back to South Africa and to a long-standing structural challenge. Architect Wandile Mthiyane points to a housing backlog of more than 2.5 million homes, arguing that the issue is less about a lack of policy and more about how it's implemented. His view is that decentralized, community-driven approaches could help unlock progress where top-down delivery has struggled. Here's that conversation.
I think it's part policy, part political will, and part execution. So there's a policy that came up, I think, around 2008. It's called the EPH policy. And what it does is it decentralizes how affordable housing is distributed by the government. So instead of hiring one contractor to build 1,000 homes where there's a lot of bottlenecks, potential corruption, and if anything happens to that contractor, the whole housing project is stalled, right? So what you do is you actually build out stands and give people stands What it does is it creates a sense of urgency, and people get to design and build their own homes. You give them land, you give them stands, access to water and electricity. And similar to how, social service grants work, you then give them money to be able to build their own homes, the same budget you would have given to that other contractor. And the argument can't be that you don't have the infrastructure because you already have so much social grants, right? And the same way you would have come and assessed at different levels of the house, you come and assess at different levels individually. What this does is it creates job opportunities when South Africa has such high youth unemployment. It creates ingenuity, and people are able to design and build their own homes. So platforms like the Ubuntu home that I'm building enables people to design their own dignified homes and also creates jobs within the community. And that's really what I'm advocating for. The problem is in execution. The policy exists, right? The implementation doesn't. You know what I mean? So people are doing things the same lazy way, right? Like one big general contractor, one big general developer, and clearly it's not working, right? We've got 2.5 million backlog. Now, to cut some slack on the government part, right? Because this is not a complaint walk. It's a solutions-based walk. When they started the RDP program, I think they had like 2 million homes or something like that. They've far exceeded the goal of that particular program.
And that's BizNews Daybreak for this morning. I'm Asimenite. Thanks for listening. We'll keep you updated as the stories develop. Cheers.